A lot of people listen to the radio in their cars, but no one is driving. Still others love to listen at work, but everyone's working at home. Now what happens? Following social distancing, we're on location in Annapolis, Maryland with Charlie Sislen, who's a partner at RDI, Research Director Incorporated, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Nielsen publishes on a regular basis the amount of people who listen to the radio, and then stations and advertisers use that to place their content. Your job is to interpret it. What trends are you seeing these days?
Well, lifestyles have changed drastically since the onset of COVID-19. Now, the data in major markets, top 45 markets in the US, let's say, comes out every 28 days. And the previous report, which was called March, half the report was before the government shutdown or before the shutdown, and half was after it. So that was a fairly unusual report. The latest report that is just being released this week, all 28 days were during the government shutdown. And we saw a drastic change in how people listen to radio by both extent, where, and when. And it is a true reflection that lifestyles have changed. People aren't in their cars as much. People aren't at their offices as much. So being less mobile, the out-of-home listening has dropped off, but there have been some increases at home listening.
Now, when you say it's dropped off, is it a 10% decline, a 30% decline, or even worse?
Well, it's definitely worse. It depends on what your base is. If we look at the past 12 books before that March report, because that March report's half and half, you're usually seeing somewhere around a total 30% drop in radio listening, or at least how Nielsen measures it. And most of that drop or more significant is the drop in the younger demos. The 18 to 34 and 18 to 49 have seen a more significant decline in their listening. Most of that decline, if not in some markets, all of that decline has been from away from home listening.
So what happens if in the younger demographics, people just live stream at home and still want to listen to their favorite radio station?
Well, that's a great question. And that gets into how the survey is done. The survey is done in these major markets by people carrying a device called a PPM. And that device picks up whatever radio station you're listening to. If your ears can hear it, the meter can hear it. And it timestamps it so it knows what you were listening to and when you were listening. For all terrestrial radio stations, they have an encoder on their signal. Not all streamed radio stations have an encoder. Most do, but some don't. If they don't have that encoder at their digital platform, the listening is occurring, but the meter's not picking it up. So it is losing that listening. The other part of listening that's lost and has been ever since Nielsen went to the system is headphones, now earbuds. Again, the meter has to hear that device, or the device has to hear the signal. And if you're wearing earbuds, it just doesn't pick it up.
So the personal people meters, the PPMs, are not
Correct.
necessarily picking up what they should. What does that mean to radio station ownership, management, and then advertisers?
Well, the Nielsen data is our currency. That is how people negotiate the rate of the radio station. Now, for the terrestrial signals, let's put the earbuds to the side. For the terrestrial stations, most of them are encoding, so it's picking up all the listening. It's those streams, but if broadcasters have two ways of taking care of their stream. One is called TLR. That stands for Total Line Reporting. And what that means is whatever comes out of your stream or whatever comes over the airways through your tower is identical to what comes through your stream, including the commercial messages. In that case, Nielsen puts the two numbers together, and you can't separate them because the ads are the same on both. However, many radio stations do what they call split their signal. The commercial that you hear over the antenna or in the regular broadcast is a different commercial than you hear on the stream. In that case, Nielsen does not combine them. But what broadcasters do is they sell the digital differently. They typically don't use the Nielsen data to sell their currency. They're selling it on gross impressions, just how we can deliver this ad 10,000 times in Boston. And because it's all server based, they know that they've delivered that commercial 10,000 times. So it's more of a actual delivery than using the Nielsen for negotiating of a rate.
Now, I know that your company has clients all over the United States and also in Canada. What are you primarily hearing from your clients these days? Are they sucking up the last 28 days, or are they already making future business planning changes?
Well, right now, let's remember, and I did a talk yesterday, that this collapse, and I'll use that term, happened in about 36 hours. And I say the line that radio station salespeople had to go through the first 5 parts of grieving in about 36 hours, which is, denial, anger, whatever the rest are. They had 36 hours. Now, what we're talking about radio listening, but I need to stress that sales also plummeted because when restaurants close, they're not advertising.
Sure.
When concerts and sporting events aren't happening, they're not advertising. In April, we saw the typical radio station lose about 50 to 70% of its revenue. That's massive, cut in half or more. May is kind of summer, everyone's down, but summer not as bad, but we're still hearing 30 to 50% down. So salespeople have had to adapt to how they're handling this change. Now, our hope is as markets open up, not only will the ad revenue come back, but people will be commuting again. People will be in their offices again. People will be out shopping again. And at that time, their radio listening will be back to normal levels. We're right now having a pool on, again, we just had the March report and the April report. When the May report comes out, how much is it going to be up? And we're playing games with it. We think listening will be back up, not to its normal levels, because this is going to be a slow rollout. But what we're telling people is, and Nielsen has a notification in their March and April books that says, once markets open up, this data is not a true reflection of radio listening. Because as lifestyles change, and the PPM is very good at picking up changes in lifestyle. As lifestyles have changed, people stop listening to radio or reduce the amount they're listening to radio. And as they start to get back in their car, it's going to be back. So we're suggesting to our clients that once your market opens up, ignore the March book, ignore the April book, and while it may be old data, use the January and February reports, because that's a truer reflection of radio listening.
Charlie, what keeps you up at night about the future of your own company?
My own company? Owning a business is always stressful. Obviously, I've never had children, but I say it's like childbirth. The pain is incredible, and you don't know the benefit until it's over. What keeps me up at night is the idea that there are so many different ways for people to advertise now. I mean, when I started in this business, it was television, it was broadcast television, radio, billboards, and newspaper. Well, now, radio sales or media sales, like everything else, is supply and demand. It's supply and demand. Well, we now have an unlimited amount of advertising supply. We will never run out of advertising supply because of digital. Google is never going to turn somebody away and say, I don't have any ad space. Therefore, the price that radio stations charge is a fraction, or could become a fraction. So radio stations can't sell as a commodity, same way television can't sell as a commodity. Newspapers are trying to make the transition over to digital, but having a very easy time of transferring the readership to digital, but having a very difficult time of transferring the revenue to digital. And that's my fear for radio. We can do a great job of pushing people from the terrestrial signal to the smart speaker, but we better know how to monetize that in a way that we can continue to be a profitable business.
Charlie, thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie Sislen, partner at Research Director Incorporated out of Annapolis, Maryland. In a ball game, the pitcher wants the first pitch to go right over the plate, a solid strike. Why should business be any different? We're on location with Debi Kleiman, who's an author, educator, mentor, and practitioner, all at Babson College, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Greg, I'm really happy to be here.
Your first book, First Pitch, just came out. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it was really exciting for me to write this book because it's really the culmination of all the work that I do with startups every single day. As executive director of the Blank Center at Babson College, I work with several hundred students every year, and what I hear time and time again is how nervous or intimidated or overwhelmed they feel about the pitching process. And so I really wanted to create something that would take a little bit of that angst out of it, because in reality, the pitching process should be something fun, something exciting. They get to tell the world about their company. So I wanted to create a resource which really gave them very concrete advice, strategic analysis of how they were doing, what they were saying, and giving them really practical ways to move forward with their pitch.
Most elevator pitches are meant to be 2 to 3 minutes long. How will your approach be different?
Actually, a lot of different kinds of pitches. There's certainly the short versions like an elevator pitch or a rocket pitch like you're talking about. And those are more used in conversational settings to get someone to kind of lean in and ask the next question. Investor pitches or mentor pitches or advisor pitches tend to be a lot longer, where you're really being able to get into the story of what you're building and why, and talking about your team and really what your unique value proposition is. And so the trick is to be able to get all that information out in a way that keeps people's attention, keeps them engaged, maybe kind of grabs them in the gut, really creates an emotional connection. So there's actually a real art to it. And so I'm hoping to provide a really distinct path forward for entrepreneurs who really just don't know how to communicate in that way.
If you were writing the book now in light of COVID-19, would any of your recommendations change?
Well, I would certainly add a whole chapter on how do you pitch online, because it's really, really changed the game. In fact, for most people, obviously, pitching is all about relationships. It always has been, it always will be. But now the trick is to build that relationship online, and that's a lot harder. So you're going to have to do a lot of things that change the pitch process. You might pitch in smaller bites of information because people can only stay engaged for so long online, or you might spend more time telling your story in an engaging way in order to capture their attention. Or you might try to find other ways to connect with your audience, depending on if it's a big audience or a small audience, in ways that they start to get to know you better and start to feel more of a connection because they can't be right in front of you. So I would definitely add a whole bunch on that, because in the book, there's a whole chapter about coffee shop meetings, which are such a part of the startup world. Let's go get coffee, let me tell you about my startup. And now we can't do that anymore. So we really kind of need to revamp what we do and teach ourselves to find ways to make connections with people online. I think this means that probably the funding process and the relationship building process will take longer. And so people need to be aware of that. But otherwise, a lot of the universal principles about building relationships and being engaging and compelling still remain.
Now, in the age of all things digital, post-COVID-19, how do you intend to engage with your audience outside of the written word?
For me, I've created a website, and I also teach at Babson, and I teach online as well. So I'd like to continue doing that and bring in more of what I've learned about this process. And also I'd like to spend some time working on a module for other educators, because in my role as center director at Babson, I know a lot of center directors all around the country at other colleges and universities who work with pitching and help their students try and get good at pitching. But the problem is they don't have a lot of material, or they don't have a lot of resources. So the other thing I'd like to do, and I think this would amplify what I've learned and what I've created within the book, is this ability to teach other educators how to teach pitching the way that I teach it, and help their students really grasp the methodology and the framework that I propose in the book.
Debbie, how do you think the equity investment process is going to change post-COVID-19, and should that affect the way that people pitch?
Well, I think it shouldn't affect the way people pitch, really. I think what needs to be adjusted slightly are people's expectations. I think there's going to be lower valuations, or at least more moderated valuations than there were before COVID-19 hit. I think also the kinds of businesses that get funded are going to be different. Obviously, things that involve helping remote workers or digital types of communication or entertainment are going to be super big. Healthcare will be really big. So there's certain industries that will continue to thrive. And then there are others that will really have a tough time pitching their ideas, things like travel and retail, for at least a little while we figure out what the next dynamic normal looks like for our country.
In all of the pitches that you've seen going back many years, what do you think the single biggest mistake people make is?
I think people try to get the information out as fast as they can and as sort of intellectually as they can. And the truth is that there's a lot of emotion that goes into telling your story. And the good ones do a really good job of building that emotional connection. They're storytelling, right? They're taking the listener on a journey, and they're taking them through the why of why they've begun this company to begin with and how the world is going to change because they started it. And I think that's very hard for a lot of people to get used to. And that's why my approach in the book is really different than other things that I've seen, because I use my background as a marketer to bring in that marketer's perspective. And marketing, like storytelling and like pitching, is all about persuasion. And so what I really want to do is teach people how to be persuasive in their storytelling and how they sort of flow the pitch out to the listener. And a lot of times I think people just get very factual. They're just dumping a whole bunch of data, and our brains aren't wired to remember that or to be excited by that.
Once you get through the first pitch and hopefully get a second meeting, how does that pitch need to change before you get a check?
Well, a lot of times it's a long building process of relationships and kind of getting to know each other and really understanding the team and what are they uniquely capable of doing that nobody else can do in this space. So I don't think there's a ton that's going to change per se. I think that it's more back to all the universal principles that people invest in today. You know, are you feeling compelled by the founder? Are you feeling compelled by the team? Do you feel compelled by the idea? You know, are they working on something that nobody else has really recognized is going to happen, a trend or an idea or a combination of trends that is going to give you a unique competitive advantage in the world? And so it's all about the market opportunity, really. I mean, if the market opportunity doesn't feel right to you, then it's going to be difficult to get people to pay attention.
How will you determine if this project has been successful?
Well, for me, I really went into this because I wanted to help people. So I heard a lot from my students and the startups that I've worked with for over 15 years. They tell me all the time that my methodology and the way I talk about pitching, the way I teach pitching is really, really helpful. It takes a lot of the intimidation out of it. And so I really just wanted to share that with the world. So for me, the measure of success will really be if I hear from people who read the book and understand what I'm teaching them about in the book, that it really made a difference to them, that they felt confident, that they felt ready, that they felt really prepared and excited to tell their story to the world and to get not only funding, but mentors and press and advisors and influencers to really lean in and take notice of what they're doing. And for me, that would be the greatest success.
Debi, thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Debi Kleiman, author of the newly released book, First Pitch.